Good morning, everybody. Tuesday, February 9th. It's a committee meeting of the Senate Agricultural Committee. And this morning, we're going to be hearing from Dan Smith and Roger Albee. And we have Michael O'Grady on with us. We're going to be talking about the report from DFR and to try to see if y'all help us decide if there's enough in that report to move forward in a positive direction with the task force. So I don't know if any committee members have anything to add right now, but if not, the way we've got you two gentlemen listed on the schedule is Dan would go first and Roger, but you can change that if you'd like and however you want to do it. I think the committee members, so the committee members are all present. Anthony Polina will be joining us shortly. So do you guys, Dan and Roger, welcome to our meeting. And do you have a preference on the order? Who wants to lead off or who wants to follow? And
yeah, thanks a lot, Bobby, and good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you. I've always deferred to Roger for a variety of reasons, and in all seriousness, as the former secretary, and so we decided Roger should lead off.
I think it's because of my age, Senator.
well, we're all gaining age every week, so you've handled your years of gaining well. So welcome, Roger, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Senator and committee members. And thank you for holding this session as well. I think you know of my background, spending many years in the ag sector, as well as on dairy issues going way back. I grew up on a small hillside dairy farm many years ago in southern Vermont, and after that spent some time after my military service, of course, on the professional side, even working for Jim Jeffords on the House Ag Committee in Washington, where I was a so-called dairy expert at the time. And then
you were an expert?
Well, you know what an expert is, and unknown under a lot of pressure, but anyhow, and then with Farm Credit Banks and in the Bank for Cooperatives in Springfield, where dairy was the major part of our portfolio back then. And we were involved in helping put together the Cabot Agrimark marriage, because Cabot was facing significant financial problems, as you well know, back then, as well as many of the dairy co-ops were facing problems even back then as well. I've read the PCHEC report that the committee asked to be done, and I commend it for what it identifies as a number of options that need to be looked at very seriously in the future. We've studied dairy backwards and forwards over a number of years. And Senator, you know the issue well because of your leadership in creating the compact years ago, Dairy Compact. And the issues have not changed in terms of what the fundamental problems are. Just a quick story. When I was asked to serve as Ag Secretary by Governor Douglas, my first day on the job, very first day on the job, I was called by the chairman of St. Albans Cooperative at the time. And I think you know that prior to that, I think the legislature had put in $6 million early 2000 in the dairy industry in Vermont because of the concerns about the pricing situation. In my very first day on the job, I had a call from Ralph McNall, then the chairman of St. Albans Cooperative. And Ralph said, we need more money. We need more money. And I said, Ralph, you just got 6 million to the dairy industry. He said, I'm begging you. I'm begging you. I don't usually beg, but I'm begging you. We need more money. I said, Ralph, it's going to send the message that the dairy industry can't survive in the market economy. I'm begging you, please arrange a meeting with the governor and the legislature. We need more money. And that you were there at the time, Senator, and the meeting was arranged. And I think $3+ million again was provided to the dairy farmers because of the situation. And the situation hasn't changed. I think last year, the federal government provided about $4-something billion to the dairy industry. And it represented about $2.20 a hundredweight to dairy
Yeah.
farmers in the country.
Yeah.
And the culprit, and we're down, when I was secretary, we had 1,300 dairy farms. I think we're down to 636 today, something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, somewhere in that range. And the P-check report really identifies that some bold actions are needed and some studies are needed. And I commend you for considering a task force because the issues have lingered much too long, much too long. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Roger. And I've been at this a lot of years, and all the years that I've served, either as a member or chair of either the House Ag Committee and or the Senate Ag Committee, and I'll tell you, it never seems to never end. And of course, last year when we as a committee were talking about how rough it was and how we were losing too many farms, we were quite concerned. And after hearing from you guys at that hearing we had in room 10 and many others, we as a committee decided to move forward with, and we didn't do this lightly, but we wanted somebody with some fresh eyes to look at the whole situation and with new eyes, and to try to come back with some suggestions on, how to move forward. And so that's where we are, of course.
Senator, can I say a couple of other things that
Sure.
add to this? When I was with the Farm Credit Banks and Bank for Cooperatives, former Bank for Cooperatives in Springfield, Mass, that covered the Northeast back in 1987, they did a major study of the dairy industry across the country. It was something they did jointly with Penn State and Cornell and others. And I have the book, it's pretty thick. And they looked at each state, dairy production and number of farmers in each state. And I keep hearing people say, oh, we're producing more milk than we did in the past in Vermont. Well, I looked at the data. I've taken the data from 1987 up to today, and our growth in milk production in Vermont has been less than 1/2% over that period of time. Sure, our farms have become more efficient, but we're not growing our milk supply. And when I was Ag Secretary, you remember Saputo that used to exist in the state?
Yeah.
Their farm burned, and the Lieutenant Governor and Doobie and myself went up to Montreal to meet with the leaders of Saputo. And we said to them, is there anything we can do to keep you in the state of Vermont? And they said, well, you need to understand, it wasn't the fire. It wasn't the fire that led us to make the decision to leave Vermont. We look at where the milk supply is growing and not declining to make our investments. And I must say that I worry about Ben and Jerry's, because here's an international firm, Unilever, that is always, when I did some international work in the past, I was on the chair of the advisory committee to the Ag Secretary and the Trade Ambassador on Dairy and Agriculture. And one of the people there who had done international trade work and was at USDA said to me, Roger, you don't understand. These international firms don't care where they get their product as long as they get it the cheapest, as long as they get it the cheapest. And Vermont is in the position they ought to be looking carefully at these issues. And that's why I commend you for doing the task force or considering a task force.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. Any questions at this point from committee members? Chris, Senator Pearson?
Thank you both. And Dan, I look forward to hearing what you have to say. It's such a delicate issue for us in Vermont, but the fact is we have our eggs in one basket more than any other state dependent on a single commodity. I think, Dan, you were the one that taught me that a couple of years ago, and it's really haunted me ever since. And I guess I wonder, for the two of you looking at agricultural economy, are we gonna have any security in our rural economy as long as that is true?
Either one of you want to comment?
Well, I don't think, Senator, that it means that Vermont doesn't need to diversify. I have old yearbooks of agriculture. This is from 1872, when there was a board of agriculture in the state of Vermont, consisted of the governor and the state college president and 6 others appointed by the governor. And one of the things that is very interesting during that period of time, and since actually, is that they all recognized back then that Vermont could not survive in the commodity market. We'd gone through the sheep period, we'd gone through the butter period where we were the butter leaders. St. Albans was the butter capital of the world back in the 1850s and 70s. And they said Vermont's future is always trying to develop those products that the consumers in the growing markets in the Northeast will want. And our farms are very diversified back then. Maple in the spring, other products as well. They grew their own food. That doesn't mean that diversity isn't needed. It is needed in various ways. But we have never, except when Senator Starr and others looked at the dairy compact as a way, we've studied dairy backwards and forwards. We know that bold action is needed and that the current system needs to be addressed in some aggressive ways.
Yeah. Any other questions? If not, we'll move on to Dan.
And Chris, Senator Pearson, I'll start and with trying to answer a little bit and then transition into what I was going to say, because I think they are connected. I actually think the situation in Vermont in terms of diversification is better than it's been in quite a while. I think that there's been a lot of very creative work that's been done to diversify the state away from dairy. Part of the reason I think is positive and part of it's kind of neutral. The positive is I think all of the conversation around the idea that you don't want to be a monolithic culture has led to a blossoming of other ways to approach it, and with terrific new energy and new thoughts, and people have come to the state attracted by the supportive way of doing agriculture here in Vermont. And we're actually in a better place. And I think the Farm to Plate report that just came out is maybe the best evidence of that there's a tremendous creative energy. And I think Chuck's time as secretary was really sort of the bulwark of that. at the same time, I think part of what's prompted it is people just constantly throwing up their hands and saying, we don't know what to do about the federal order program, so we're not going to do anything. We're going to do something different. But the convergence has been to make a better situation than we've been in a while. So I think the short answer to your question is yes. I think all of the innovative approach to trying to pursue diversification from dairy is leading to a broader base of agriculture in the state. But the challenge is that dairy is still the anchor of the infrastructure, and the what keeps the land open with all the development rights and all of the apparatus that's been built. So it strikes me that where we are is trying to find and advance the balance in a constructive way. And here's the transition. I think that the report by the Department of Financial Regulation gives a task force the basis to take that dialogue in the next big advance. And I think Roger's directive to me and then ultimately to you that bold action is needed. That's where we are. And Bobby, what you did to send this to the Department of Financial Regulation is extremely helpful in that. In having an outside set of eyes look at what's always been looked at internally. So if you're going to take bold action, it's hard for the internal crew to think about making dramatic change. Whereas what the Department of Financial Regulation, which you charge to take a look at this and really test the Roger's theory that bold action is needed. And they came back to you and said, yes, indeed, bold action is needed. Because if we continue down the road with just relying on the federal order program, the future doesn't look really very good. And they confirmed that. And I think that that's a fundamental starting point in this, that having, as you said, an organization with a knowledge base of business regulation reach the same conclusion that a number of us on the inside have been saying, that's an important fundamental point, a starting point. And then I think, as Roger said, on top of that, they didn't just throw up their hands and say, well, that we're stuck with the federal order program, and so the future doesn't look too rosy. They came up with a series of options to consider. And while they didn't really come out with any strong recommendation for any of them, there's quite a bit of advance of the discussion that I think the task force can work from. So if you go through their report, the options included to start supply management, which I think if you look at the history of dairy and you as dairy, but you also look at it from the position of industrial economics, again, from an outside position, if you have too much milk, the answer is to try to create a balance between supply and demand for the raw product. So they came out and said that if we could figure out a way to do that, that would certainly address the problem. And that's been the holy grail since I started to come up with a supply management. It's obviously difficult to do, but again, I think that's a building block. They pointed to the work the agency's been involved with. There has been some advance with that. So I think the task force can revisit that, figure out how the legislature can support that. So that's a good next move for the task force. I personally found their discussion of hedging to be of interest. I've never really thought about the idea of, and I went back and I'm not sure the report was really saying this, but whether the state could play some kind of different role in hedging than what the federal programs have hedged around the price of corn, basically. But whether there's some other way, hedging is obviously a strategy in every business. And agriculture has looked at hedging against the milk price, but whether there's some way that you could look at a business hedge, because ultimately the problem with the federal order program is the volatility of the price. So if there's a way that the state might come up with a way to intervene in that volatility through hedging that's not tied to the corn price. You know, that I thought, again, they aimed the task force in what is potentially a constructive direction. I hadn't thought about a compact in a long, long time, to be honest. People used to call all the time. Now they call, I would say, infrequently. And I got to the point I don't think about it until people call. We get into a fairly extended conversation. As the report said, they were trying to figure out why the compact got terminated since it was working, which is an interesting question. So we talked about that, and you know, they kind of pushed me. Did I think that the compact could be the answer to the situation? And I have to say, quite frankly, I just don't think so. Which they really didn't want to hear, but that's my opinion. That we've gone from a milk market of Vermont that was 6 billion pounds around Boston fluid market, and now it's 27 billion, 26 billion pounds. That includes the fluid markets of New York and Boston and all the manufactured product in between. It's just difficult to think how you could do that, but it did get me to think a little bit more, because they pushed harder than most people have, you know, again, from a different perspective. Usually the discussion is political on the one hand, or it's milk on the other, but they were looking at business regulation. And what I thought about is that Vermont, with the Northeast Dairy Compact, the New England Dairy Compact, really was 2.5 billion pounds out of 6, and not quite half, but a big, sort of the leading part of it. Now Vermont is 2.5 billion pounds out of 25. So Vermont's actually more in a subordinate position, the way Massachusetts and Connecticut were with our compact. So you would be participating from a position as one of the minority folks. And that's a tough place to be. But then if you keep going, the position that Vermont has in the market's quite unique. And this is where Roger and I started with you, which is that of the 25 billion pounds of milk, roughly 9 is the fluid market. And Vermont doesn't have much of the fluid market left. So that's 9 of 26. Somewhere on the order 7 in there is powder. And we've got some of the powder, not much, up in St. Albans. So you've got the fluid, which used to have the value, and the powder, which has very little value. That's more than half, roughly half. The remainder is the cheese and the soft products, and that's where the value is. So, you know, round numbers, about 10 billion pounds, 11 billion pounds of milk. Of that, Vermont's got a big chunk of it. So Vermont's position in the bigger market is where the value is in the dairy market. So even though in volume we're small, in value we're big. And so the question is how to get that advantage. That's the advantage that Vermont still has. And so the report, you sort of encapsulated that issue in the discussion the other day, that the market has moved from the value being in the bottle to the value being in a pint of ice cream. And it's kind of hard to contemplate that that's the case, but that's the case. And so my feeling on that one with the report is that it's a complex, that's where the complexity of the milk business really shows up. And they have a good starting understanding of that issue that the task force can rely on. So I think part of what you were trying to do was get a new set of eyes on the issue with business background, which you did, and it was a useful exercise. But in addition to that, you've got this new set of eyes in the process of learning the business so that we can go use them in the future and draw on the knowledge that started to have been created outside the Agency of Agriculture. And nothing against the agency, but to have a business-oriented part of the government dealing with the dairy business industry, which is a business, as Jane Clifford says over and over, that's a good thing. And I think that will be, they confirmed the fundamental point that Roger and I were trying to suggest, that as a business, 1.6 billion pounds of milk is now being utilized in state. And that's a complete transformation of the industry. So they confirm that as a matter of business. And that's a starting point. Really is the starting point. And the capacity is more than 1.6, which means that some of the milk is coming in from out of state. But there's a significant capacity for the creation of high value dairy products in the state of Vermont. And how do we rationalize that value among the different players, and that solidifies the dairy base. And to get back to, I think, Chris's point, doesn't have to be all that we do, but it is the base. And if we can have a better distribution of the wealth and the value, then that creates a better base to build other agriculture enterprises in the state. And it doesn't have to just be dairy dependent if we can rationalize that piece of it.
Well, and thinking back over the years, and it was way back when Roger was Commissioner or Secretary of Ag, we were preaching in the legislature and well, we've got to go to value-added products to be able to survive. And, if you look now back, lo and behold, we have gone to value-added products, but the money never trickles down to the farm. Our farmers get paid the same as the ones in Maine, Maine does better because they take general fund dollars, but Mass and Connecticut and probably New York. And so we in the ag community did do what was strongly recommended, but the federal milk market order is still messed up so that we don't get that value.
Senator, can I say something again?
Sure.
You know well, because you're very well schooled and know this stuff backwards and forwards too. But the federal milk market order that we have was created in 1937 by the Ag Adjustment Act. Yeah, it's been changed some over time with classified pricing, but it's the same. My youngest daughter lives in Wisconsin. And about 2 years ago, I haven't been out there since the COVID-19, but when I went out there, I spent some time talking to dairy people, both farmers as well as people in the policy arena. And as you know, the head of the dairy policy at University of Wisconsin used to be at Cornell. And I talked to him because we had him involved in all the Milk Commission work that we did, and you were on the task force back then. We did significant work. And I said to him, John, does the pricing system need to be changed? And he said, yes, absolutely. I said, do you think it will be changed? He said, well, the problem with the co-ops with block voting, it's hard to change with them, but it needs to be changed. It's not working. It's working against the interest of farmers.
If I could just respond a little bit to it, because there's two of the things I wanted to say about the report that I didn't say. One was about Maine, and one is I thought that the report was a little missed a little bit on what's going on in Maine. That the money is not really general fund dollars. The trick of what Maine has done is try to set up a regulation that gets through all of the legal roadblocks that have been put up over time for state price regulation. So what the state has done is set up a handler fee. It's a fee on the handling of milk in state, and then put that money in the general fund. But it's still milk money that comes out of the milk market. It's not tax money. It's a handler fee that goes into the general fund. And then once it's in the general fund, it belongs to the legislature. And that's what the Supreme Court said in the West Linn case. That's what Scalia said. If you do it that way, then it's not a regulation that the industry has taken over. It's a political decision. You could tax the movement of milk and then spend it on something else. But if you're not doing that and you make the political decision to provide it to the farmers, then that creates a political check on the industry. It's really very clever, but it's still, there is some money that comes out if the handler fee is not sufficient to satisfy the tier payments, then some general fund money comes in. But basically they're taking money out of the market and giving it to the farmers. And it's, you know, I think that that's a really advanced in milk market regulation. It takes a while to see the moving parts. You know, again, the task force could spend some time and see that that's one way that you can advance a state regulation and get over the legal difficulties. And that's the other thing I wanted to say is that I thought that the report's conclusion that if approached carefully, a state price regulation can be done legally. You know, that's an important, you asked for confirmation of that. And when we were doing the dairy compact and starting to get some traction, you basically said to me as similarly, I need some confirmation that if we're going to get this far down the road, that we're not going down the rabbit hole we're never going to come out of. And one thing led to another, and we hired a couple of Harvard law professors, you know, completely out of the dairy industry to look at the legality of what we're doing. And they came back and said, yeah, you know, be careful how you're doing it, but it's legal. So I think you got a similar legal confirmation. We got to be careful about what we're doing, but if we are careful, we can do it. And that's what Maine did. You know, it's really clever what they did. Then the other thing I wanted to say about Maine, which I didn't think the report was really constructive enough, is the other way to get at, and this is more to your point, Chris, the tier program is really clever. What they're doing in Maine in making they take the money out of the market and they put it in the general fund. But then instead of just paying it out on a 100-weight basis, they're paying it out calibrated to the size of the operation so that they create some stability across the farm distribution in Maine to create stability. So you don't have this constant winnowing down from a group of small farms into bigger farms. And it's working. So, you know, that's a piece I think that we can build on if the task force were to go down the route of regulation. You can build on those two pieces that Maine has done, that the report surfaced, but really didn't get into too deeply.
But I think that would be our whole objective here with the task force is, and the way we've got it worded, I believe, and Michael could jump in, but I think the way we have it worded is it'd be legislators, but some expert people in the ag field that would work on this and then come back to the legislature with some suggestive corrections or steps forward. I think basically that's how we put the compact together, if I remember right. But I mean, we did it in Vermont in the legislature. You know, we just did it. And then we took that and went to the public and to the farmers and said, hey, this is where we are. This is what we've got. And would you like to comment on it? And, you know,
I would confirm
that went good.
The legislatures from the committee structure from New York and Vermont wrote the compact just straight out of the legislature and then took it to the public for comment. That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah, John McHugh, you guys must have heard of him. He went on to Congress and then got some big promotion, was in charge of something to do with the military. But John.
He was Secretary of the Army.
Pardon?
Secretary of the Army.
Yeah. Senator Calmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I wanted to ask Dan, going back to the Maine situation and the handling fee, how often is that changed? who changes it? And is it changed with a regularity that could keep up with the federal milk market order to sort of balance things?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's changed. They're on a biennium session as well, and it's changed the beginning of every biennium. So they go through a hearing, the first of the biennium. The University of Maine does a study of cost of processing milk and a cost of producing milk, and each of those studies affect, on the one hand, the handler fee, and on the other, the tier payment. That was the design anyway, that there would be a recalibration. The legislature makes the decision, and not the milk control boards, made by the legislature. The amount of the handler fee and the amount of the tier payments is a legislative decision, again, to insulate according to the decision. It's really clever. And that's what they put in statute, and that's what they've been doing. It's going on 15 years. However, the amount of the tier payments that were intended to keep up with the federal order, like you're talking about, and kind of pull the others with it, they haven't adjusted those. So they're actually, the amount that the farmers are getting, which was supposed to be essentially a break-even price to balance off the federal order, is starting to fall behind, because the federal order price is so degraded at this point that you either have to pitch up the handler fee, and you're really, it's only 60% of the milk in state. So it's an ingenious program, but it's having trouble keeping up in that sense.
Their tier system similar to ours too?
Their tier system,
We don't have,
which tier system are you referring to?
Well, you mentioned that Maine has a tiered system, right?
Right. Yeah,
Can you just explain that a little?
sure. So they basically structured 3 different sizes of farm operation, and they tiered a payment to those sizes, with the bigger, and I can't remember, 200 cows, 500 cows, above 500 cows, up to 200, up to 500, above, something in that order of magnitude. And then the pricing, again, I haven't looked at the numbers in a while, but it's like, you want to hit an $18 a hundredweight for the bigger farms, and a 20, I think, for the intermediate, and a 22 for the smaller farms. And then they take the money out of the handler fee in the general fund and pay you. If you're a farmer, you report your production, and then the money is administered through the milk control board based on your production, and is paid out based on your production.
Thank you.
so it's really based on the cost of production, because the big farms claim they can produce their milk cheaper
Correct.
than the little guy. Chris, you had a question? I believe Anthony has one.
Yeah, a couple of questions. The main system doesn't make them whole though, right? It just like, it doesn't, if you were a medium or a small farm and producing, for $20, they don't bump you up to 22, does it? It's not that
So
wealthy.
what they aim for is what they call a break-even price. But what constitutes a break-even price in a dairy farm is sort of the holy grail of, what does it cost,
It's all over.
But the university studies are the best that I've seen. And I've probably read 25, cost of production studies over the years, and theirs make sense. And they're looking for a break-even price that will keep the farmer on the land, but not necessarily, make them so profitable that they're going to produce milk that the market doesn't need, right? That's the.
But does the fund take them up to that point if they prove that they're producing at $20 and the analysis is it should be 22?
No, so you have a university study that says farms in this tier, a cost of production that would be the break-even price for a farm in that tier. It's not your particular farm or mine, if you're in that tier, you get this amount of money. And so it's some kind of a mean average, and some people are going to make a little bit more and some a little bit less, but that's the break-even price.
Okay. When we looked into this idea of a processor fee a few years ago, and based on Maine, based on the legality of what they were doing in Maine.
Yeah.
And I recall, I don't think I was in the committee at the time, but I was working with Mr. O'Grady, and Bobby was part of the conversation. And one of the immediate pushback we had, which is different from Maine, I wonder if you can help me remember and understand, is the geography. First of all, we have a lot of milk that's handled by our processors that does not originate in Vermont. And secondly, if we're contemplating something like this, why wouldn't the DFAs of the world just say, well, fine, we don't need to process any milk here. We'll process it across the lake in our other plants and show you that you can't actually give us this charge. Whereas Maine has this geographic isolation that in this case protects it.
Sure, I get it.
Am I recalling that right? And
Well, you
To a degree.
about half of it. It's the geography, as well as there's a balance in the state of the milk that they produce, process, and consume is about 60% of their milk, whereas we're fluid-wise 5%. So the capability to extract money out of that fluid market within the state, like they're doing in Maine, that's, you got the geographic isolation in Maine that's kept DFA from playing games, which you're absolutely right on. But the reason that there's something to begin with that somebody might play games with is that they've got processing and consumption in state. Because they're tucked up, they need processing up there because you can't move milk that distance. So you got to have some plants for the population. Whereas here, we just don't have any, very many people to begin with. They've got almost 3 times the people that we do. And we got a lot more milk than they produce. So the balance of the market, but what, and again, it's what's interesting about the report coming in from the outside sort of primes the pump on the discussion that the task force can get to. What I was suggesting that is in what Maine did is that can be adapted to our circumstance is the tier payment. That's the money going out, rather than like with the compact, we just paid it out on a 100-weight basis. If you were milking 1,500 cows, you got the same price as if you were milking 50 cows. And in the advance of what's going on, that's a real advance that Maine's come up with. It's a much better way in the public interest to pay out money that you're taking out of the market through a public regulation. That's a big advance. And then the second big advance is the legal advance. And how you do that, I don't know. But instead of just having a regulatory board that says, okay, we're gonna charge an extra $1 on the market, collect the money and pay it out to the farmers, and the court says, well, we're worried about the burden on interstate commerce. But if you put the money into the legislature, and then the legislature is making a public interest decision about what to do with it, that's an advance too. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to follow the Maine model on fluid milk. And back to Bobby's point, the money is in Ben & Jerry's and in the cheese now that we're producing. That's where the money is now. So can you figure out a way to adapt the Maine model, which is built around a fluid business, into a high valued manufacturing business, which is what Vermont's got to? I think their report says we don't quite get all that, but if it's done right, maybe that can be done, because legally the burden on interstate commerce should not be as much of a problem because the milk transactions in the state, and that's a big change. So I don't know if I headed too much information your way, Chris, but that's kind of the bigger picture here.
No, but you're okay. That is helpful, but help me understand the entirely predictable industry pushback that says, well, fine, we just won't process it in Vermont. where Maine, as you've helped me understand why it's different in Maine, but you haven't helped me have any confidence that we could pull it off for that reason.
So it's Roger's point that he's worried about, Mike's got his hand up, so
Yeah,
So,
go ahead.
so the handler fee is not just on processing, it's if you buy it. So
Yeah.
it's buying, processing, manufacturing.
if you're
It's
using.
not
the
just,
milk-
right.
Using the milk in state, yeah. But most of that milk is in the bottle.
So if you, well, we better go to Anthony because he had a question before Chris. Anthony?
Well, actually, Chris's question was very similar to mine, and Danny actually in his answer actually addressed what I was wondering about, which had to do with the amount of fluid milk and the amount of milk that's consumed in the state, and how we have less of a percentage, and how that would make it difficult to do the regulation. When we talk about getting money, the tiered payments, which is a good idea. The trick is how you would generate the money that goes into the general fund. So obviously, and, we're not very good at doing that these days. So you're proposing, and are you proposing, I'm not saying you're proposing, but are you imagining that there would be a fee on the milk that's picked up at the farm and then a fee on the milk that's processed in the state? I mean, could you envision how that would work?
Yeah.
As politically difficult as it may be, just how it might actually look?
Well, I'd like to hedge, if you don't mind the pun,
Sure.
a little bit, because I think that
That-
the department report looked at this as only, Roger and I came to you and said, this is what we think can solve the issue. And Bobby said, well, let's slow down a little bit and have the department look at this. And the department came back and said, okay, well, let's look at that issue within the context of a bunch of other issues. And I really think that that's, if I've learned nothing else in doing this, and it's important to step back, not get ahead of yourselves.
Sure.
And so I think that's really what Bobby and the department collectively has said. Next step is to get the task force together, look at the issue, and one of the possibilities is a price regulation. And these are the others, and let's consider them collectively. But with that, that as a hedge, I'm happy to advance the discussion a little bit.
Sure, but so are you saying that, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but are you saying that the regulation that you're describing would be you're the first thing you'd want to look at? You think it's a proposal that you would recommend? Because my concern in this conversation, not this particular conversation, but the broader conversation, is that we talk about the need for bold action and whatnot, and I don't want to see us assign a task force to come back with a similar thing to what the financial regulation people did. I'd like us to give them specific things to look at. Say the task force is mandated to find a solution, and there's 3 options that we want you to look at. 3 might not be the right number, but I want us to be specific with the task force so that they could have a detailed conversation the way we're trying to have around this regulation stuff, as opposed to a broad conversation that says we need to fix this, we need bold action, but here's the options. I want them to pick the option that's going to work and flush it out, if at all possible.
I think that's our, as a committee, that's our option. That's why we didn't sit around the table, or why we aren't sitting around the table as a committee trying to figure this out. I thought we talked about what we need once we get this report back is if there's some options in there to set up a task force to really drill down on those few options and come back to us as legislators with a plan to try to address the issue in a very strong way. Yeah, you guys heard me say the other day in some meeting that it really messes my mind up to go shopping with my wife, and we're going to buy some ice cream to bring home, and we pick up a Ben and Jerry's pint of ice cream, and it's $4 and something. And then we swing up around and pick up the butter and a gallon of milk, and there the gallon of milk is at $4 or 4.25. You know, how many pints, and I haven't even figured this part out, how many pints of ice cream or how many pounds of milk does it make to make a pint of ice cream, or how many pints of ice cream can you get out of 100 or out of, well, 12, 11, a gallon of milk's 8.6 pounds. So how many things of ice cream can you get out of a gallon of milk or 100 pounds? And if you take, and I know you guys all do a little shopping, those little bricks of cheese you find in the cheese aisle of the store, usually those are $3.45 a piece. Well, how many of those do you get out of 100 pounds of milk? I'm sure it's way, way more than 2. And so, but anyways, you know, I think if we did have a task force look into this and they did due diligence, hopefully they'd come back with some positive things to address the pricing. The other issue that they probably look at is our, you know, and I'm sure some of you have heard that you can, and if you use our milk here in the Northeast, you get 11 pounds of cheese out of 100 pounds of milk. And if you study what happened in Midwest in that way, get 10 pounds of cheese out of 100 pounds of milk. So, you know, there's a 10% gain, I believe, in the production because of the way our animals are cared for and fed, and the grasses that we have to feed our animals with here in the Northeast. Michael, did you have, you read through the report? Did you have any suggestions on whether on issues that we could move forward with, or the task force could move forward with out of the report?
Well, as I testified the other day, I similarly found the discussion about hedging really curious. I had never thought of that before, and I thought that was something that could be explored. And as I told Senator Polina the other day, there is a legal pathway to having a system like Maine's. And as Dan referenced earlier, Justice Scalia referenced basically how to do that in the Westland case. You did look at, as Senator Pearson referenced, you did look at that model a few years ago. And Maine is not the only state that has the handler fee system like that. Maine is different in that in that how they use their fee, but Wisconsin, Minnesota, Washington, they all have handler fees that are higher than Vermont's and that are used for something to support the industry. So I definitely think, as the report noted, that there is a legal opportunity to set up an order or a fee system that's legal and would survive a Commerce Clause challenge. Now, the task force, the way that you design the task force is that it is to automatically be created within 45 days of receiving the department report, and their charge is open-ended. And you chose to do that deliberately by just telling them or charging them to develop legislation to implement the recommendations of the commissioner. Because the commissioner's recommendations are not specific recommendations, just possibilities. I think the task force has the opportunity to choose what it wants to focus on, as Senator Polina was referencing. I think that's going to be up to the task force, what they are going to propose. They're supposed to propose it by December of 2021, so not a huge amount of time, so that you can go to legislation in 2022 if necessary.
Bobby,
So I think,
sorry.
So the task force would be the one to look at all these different ideas that we've talked about and ideas of their own to put a plan together and submit it back to us, because we'll all still be here, I hope, in next year. So that they would report back to the legislature next January. And then we would still have to decide, the legislature would decide whether or not to move forward, right?
right, I think maybe not all of the alternatives. I mean, some of the supply management stuff can be done without legislation, but most of the alternatives you're going to need legislation to implement, especially if you're going to go to some sort of fee or order system. Similarly, the hedging opportunity, that probably could be done without legislation, but if the state's going to be involved, then you probably need authority for the state to be involved. I think this is a policy decision of an order that the General Assembly should be exercising its constitutional authority as the policymaker and lawmaker for the state. And so I think that's a big part of this is your role as policymaker, and you probably should be involved in setting that.
Yeah. Dan?
So I just wanted to back a little bit what Mike is saying, and Anthony respond a little bit to your question, which is that within the context of what Mike is saying, that there's now a charge to the task force to act on what the department came up with. And Anthony, if you're asking, would I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think along the lines of what Mike is saying, this can be done legally and functionally. And on the functional side, I would add, and I tried to get the department to look at California. California set up a state pricing program in the 50s, and it kind of languished for a while until the 80s. But from the 80s, in 20 years, they went from 18 billion pounds of milk to 45 billion pounds of milk under a state order. And the state order was largely the pricing of butter, powder, and cheese that went out of state. It wasn't in state. So they had a base of fluid consumption that they built off of. And then they built this construct of manufactured products. Well, so we're in this position, Senator Pearson, we've got the manufactured products. We've got the base of manufactured products in the state. And it's worth more than the manufactured products they had in California. That's our base. That's our challenge. So, again, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but if Mike is saying it's open-ended, you want to aim the task force, that's the deal. It's that value products. Can we figure out how to do that legally without pushing the businesses out of state? Because who would want to do that? So we don't have to come up with the actual price, but we've got to figure out a way to take advantage of this tremendous opportunity that we have. So I don't mean to hide in the weeds here, but I think it's doable.
We haven't really talked about it much. I don't think in regards to this issue. But when we did the dairy compact, we had a supply control issue built into that. And I'll tell you, back at that point in time, Doug Nelson was Nelson Farms up in my district was the biggest farm in New England. And Doug figured it out how to recoup any money so that there was no loss to him. He regulated his production to meet his production demands and never lost a dime out of having a supply type system built in. And I would expect that this task force would really look at some type of a supply issue where the farmer could see, now they have a supply system in place, Agrimart as well as BFA, but the farmer doesn't make a penny off from that supply issue. They actually lose money because their production's been cut down.
Yeah.
And if you're going to put a supply system in place, why shouldn't that margin of savings go to the person that's actually practicing the supply of the product? Why should it go to the manufacturer or the seller of that product? And so I would hope that whoever's on that task force, if we decide to go that route, would even take a look at that and try to figure out a workable solution so that our farmers could survive.
Bobby, if I could, I'd go you one better, and I'd say this to you too, Anthony, that when we did the dairy compact, really the hardest thing we had to figure out in the end wasn't supply management. It was about the concern that we're going to raise the price of the cost of milk in nutrition programs. That was the toughest nut to crack. And I think that nut is tougher to crack than the issue of how to do this in the state. And we did it. And we figured out a way equitably and acceptably politically to impose a price regulation that raised the price of milk across the market, but was responsive to the obvious concern about not raising the price of nutrition programs. We did that. And I think that's more of a challenge than to figure out how to get the value out of high value manufacturing product in a more equitable way through a tier payment without creating supply dislocation within the state, because it's all here. All the participants are right here in the state. It's a political discussion, political, economic, and legal discussion we can have around the dinner table, essentially within the state. And that's an easier thing to do than what we did, struggling with the people from Boston who were worried we're going to raise the school lunch program and bust their budgets.
Yeah. Other questions? Roger, do you have anything to add to any of this?
Well, no, I mean, I think, Senator, the issues have been there for some time about looking at these options. We've known for many years that the pricing system that is in existence now with the federal orders works long-term against our dairy industry in Vermont. You've known it, you've addressed it. When we had the dairy and water quality group that we put together two years ago or so, tiered pricing even came up then as something that should be looked at. It should be looked at aggressively, because the current system is not working. It hasn't been working for years, and I'm amazed that we haven't done this sooner. But it's not due to your efforts. You've worked at it.
Well, we tried, but the older you get, you slow down. And if I was 45 years old again, probably run, the 20 hours a day that I used to run, but it's an old story that we thought we had licked, but the powers to be.
Senator, even Cobank, Cobank, the Farm Credit System, Cobank, that I used to be somewhat associated with in my younger years, after I left Washington, even says that there needs to be new ways to address the issues for smaller farms like we have in Vermont. Even they say that.
Well, and it's sad to lose farms like here, where I am, my district. The town of Jay is just to the west of the town of Troy. We used to, my dad always had a milk route and would go up there and pick up their milk. And in the summer, we'd have to have 2 trucks go up there to get all the milk out of Jay. And there isn't one farm left.
No.
And you don't think, well, so Jay hasn't got any farms left. But if you go up there and drive through town, out on the side roads, those farms have all grown up to pucker brush. I mean, it's really a sad thing because that land is going back to.
Well, Senator, there's another liability that you know very well, and the committee, I suspect, knows very well, is, a lot of these programs that we were involved in creating, you were involved in creating, from VHCB to purchase development rights. There's a big liability out there if something isn't done with many of these farms that couldn't make it if something isn't done.
Yeah. Any other questions, Chris?
So this comes back to something I'm trying to wrestle with is we talk about losing farms a lot in Vermont, and nobody wants that. But I guess I wonder if what we really mean is losing dairy farms, and how should we be talking about converting them to meat producers, to whatever, to the more diversified, so that we continue to have a strong ag economy, even as we acknowledge the dairy world is changing. And how would you recommend, we can do more than one thing. So you've been clear that you think we need a task force to try to help solve the dairy economic riddle. But how do we also, try to come up with strategies to keep this land open, to keep it in production, to keep maybe a different kind of farm viable, even if we probably should acknowledge that, we're going to see some dairy farms go out.
Well,
I mean, I don't hear me say I want this. I'm not enjoying the reality. This is just what I see in front of me. And I'm wondering how we try to balance that, because if we lose a farm from agriculture altogether, that's a crisis. And if we shift from a dairy operation to a different operation, sometimes we say we lost a farm, but actually I think, maybe we would acknowledge we're transitioning, and that seems a little more positive to me. So I'm just curious for you guys. I know you're very steeped in dairy economics, but
Senator, can I respond?
Please.
Because the transition is always going to be taking place. It's not static.
Right.
And it always will. I've always said, we have a renaissance of the past taking place. It's new people doing old things with new technology. And that's always taking place. So while dairy occupies the majority of the working landscape, and we have to be concerned about its future, that doesn't mean that all these other things don't take place. They have to take place.
I would, echo that, like I said at the beginning.
Well, yesterday we had a rollout of the strategic plan for the next 10 years. and from Alan Keeler and Abby Willard and the working groups. And, you know, it's really a great report and a lot of good things in there to be able to produce more veggies and processing's mentioned and refrigeration and proper storage and the slaughter facilities that, you know, last year or this past year, we talked about enhancing our slaughter facilities and it never really made it into the COVID fund to help fund that. But now, you know, the agency and the governor is supporting that, the processing of meat and developing markets, not only in that plan, not only here in Vermont, but in the Northeast. So, and what we spend, I think, $2.2 billion a year, Vermont does, on food. And we only collect or produce about $350 million worth of it here. And so that plan is geared up to really ramp up our own production for not only our people, but all of the Northeast. The issue that we talked quite a bit here of food security for our people. So, but those farms that I talked about a few minutes ago in my neighboring town, those farms, they aren't worth a dime to anybody, but sucking stuff out of the air may be helping, but nobody's going to go up there and clean that brush out and try to cultivate that land back into a production. So if we got a complete system in place, as we move forward and these small dairies or the large ones go out, we would have a beef industry or a vegetable industry, a potato maybe industry, but we would have these other things in place to take over and utilize that land and keep it fertile and healthy and strong soils. But I'm sure you guys have ridden through New Hampshire at different times and seen what's happened to their small farms over there. It's not a pretty picture, I'll tell you. But anyways, so any Dan?
So I think the unspoken part in this, Chris, is that there's a good reason why dairy did so well in Vermont is because and some of the farms that have gone out Bobby's way, they should be dairy farms. You know, Vermont is a dairy state, not just for bad reasons, but for good reasons. You make good milk in Vermont, and that's why Ben & Jerry's ice cream is good, why Cabot cheese is good. It's not just marketing, it's the intrinsic quality of the milk. So I take your point. We want to try to, and as I said at the outset, like Bobby said, you've got a 20-year plan, and dairy's only one piece of it now. I mean, that's a big advance. When I was in Mike's office, even though Mike's not in his office, you know, when I was there, all I was doing was dairy. We were doing current use. We were doing development rights. We were doing, you know, you name it, but it was always dairy. That isn't the case now. Dairy's only one piece of a bigger puzzle. And this discussion is, let's focus on the dairy piece of the puzzle rather than the whole puzzle. That's a big advance. But at the same time, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that Vermont is a dairy state for very good reason. And if we can, you know, there's good ice cream and good cheese and good yogurt. And if we can figure out how to get some of that money back to those farmers, makes it easier for everybody else at the same time, because that's the anchor. You know, it doesn't have to be the monolith, but it's going to be the anchor because you make good milk here. Nothing wrong with that.
Right. I appreciate that. Thanks, Dan.
Okay. Parent, how come you've been so quiet? Just because you're the new member on the committee, you know. You have
Biting
no
my
que-
tongue a little bit, Bobby.
You helped us with that lady that started her own creamery,
Yep.
and that was a good story. A lady up in Highgate, I think Highgate,
Berkshire.
Berkshire has her own creamery and makes their, pasteurizes or homogenizes their own milk. But it's a lot of, she said it's an awful lot of work to try to set up a little creamery to do this. And that was basically to balance out that 15% of their dairy milk that couldn't go to the creamery because of the supply control. So anyways, anything else, guys? Because we still got a few minutes. If you had any closing thoughts, I know Michael, we're on kind of a short timetable, right, Michael? With this issue, with our days, or
Oh, yes. So the first meeting of the task force needs to be called within 45 days of the report, which would be March 1st.
yeah,
I've reached out to the pro tem and the speaker's offices to see where they are with appointments. They're still working on it. And so, each day where you don't have the task force appointed is less flexibility for their first meeting.
so do we legislatively have to do anything, or just suggest to the committee on committees and on the House side to the speaker to move forward if that's what we desire?
Yep. And I think from the speaker's office and the pro tem's office, the act did not give a lot of specificity about who was to be appointed or how many. And you did that on purpose. You based it off of the joint rules authority for the speaker and the committee on committees to establish joint committees. But they are really looking for recommendations from you all
Yeah,
about who you want on the task force.
Yeah.
And how many people.
yeah.
Can I?
Yeah, Chris?
I'm sorry. I guess I was confused. So the task force is already mandated in legislation somewhere?
Yes.
It was a follow-up to the report?
Yep. It says after receipt of the report, the committee on committees and the speaker shall appoint a joint committee of legislators and other experts to be known as the task force to revitalize the Vermont dairy industry. And they're charged with developing legislation to implement the recommendations of the Commissioner of Financial Regulation.
Oh, we had a lot of insight. All right, good. So,
Well,
I'm sorry, Chris, I tried to frame what I said today, based on that. That
yeah,
was.
no, that's my misunderstanding. Don't sweat it. I just, we're juggling a lot these days, so.
Absolutely.
yeah.
That closes the circle.
I would expect, what I would expect is, a couple, because you don't want to get a great big crew or, it'll be a nightmare. But I would expect a couple of senators and a couple of House members, and then, 3 or 4 experts, and let them come back with, do the work and come back next year with any recommends that they might have. And what I would expect that task force to maybe have a couple of little subcommittees to bring into their meetings to present ideas to them even. I don't know what you guys think, but, you might want to get somebody from the university to come in, and you certainly want to hear from financial people and, the, there's a host of different people that you'd want to hear from in regards to putting something like this together. So I guess we've got to think about that part and who we would recommend to Becca and that crew to appoint to be on the committee or the task force rather. Any other questions from any of the members? No. Well, Dan and Roger, thank you very much for your time this morning. It was, we appreciate the presentation and your thoughts and ideas, and thank you, Michael, for being with us. We've got crew from Farm Bureau coming at 10:30, so 11:30 rather. So if there's no other questions, we'll adjourn until 11:30. Anything else?
Thank you very much, Senator
Yeah.
and members of the committee. Appreciate
you.
all you're
Thank
doing.
you very much. Good to
Yeah,
talk to you.
thank you. Well, back on.
Good discussion today, Senator, on the milk pricing. My goodness, you've got your plate full. Uh, Hey, you know,
Well,
there was a suggestion of a name that's been bounced around. I think Ken Jones is an economist over at ACCD, and I think he worked with the Milk Commission to do some of their background on the economics of what they were looking at. So he might be someone you might want to consider on that committee.
Ken Jones.
Yes,
And
I think
he
Diane,
works for ACCD.
I think that's what they said. And of course, Diane Bothfeld would be another good one.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we're kind of busy this morning. And then at noon, we're back rolling again at 12:15 with joint caucus. So explaining the budget adjustment bill to all the members that we've been working on in approach. So so it's a busy time, but that's good.
Yeah. Well,
I
we wouldn't
think-
want you to sit there at home with nothing to do, you know.
Well, I think I was just gonna say, I think the folks are getting, they're paying our way, or certainly getting their money's worth this year. Yeah. So have you got your crew pretty well lined up?
I see we're missing the president so far. Do you know where he is, Steve?
I do. I was gonna ask if Linda could please send him the invitation because it's not showing up in his inbox. and
I'll
it's-
send it right away.
Well, we don't want Joe to come up missing.
Jackie, would you
Yes.
say hi to Ray Duquette for me too, please?
Oh, I will. Yeah. Good guy.
Yes, he is.
And yeah, I haven't really had much trouble all season on Zoom. And yesterday, didn't I have one awful time getting on because they changed the format a little bit. And of course, not being really literate to computers and things. It took me 10 minutes to finally get on, but I made it late, of course. And I hate being late for meetings.
Technology is wonderful when it works. I think it was last week, I was on with House Ag and my internet worked, but I couldn't, for some reason, I had to be on the phone while I was on the Zoom. So because the phone, I mean, it's just, I'm going to have horrendous phone bills. I know, Steve, just letting you. It's
Yeah,
just, and you know, we're setting up calls for the fairs to go in to talk to institutions tomorrow. And some of those folks don't have internet or they don't know how to use the Zoom. And so it's a learning experience for everybody. Very challenging.
yeah. Are they gonna try to hook up with us sometime along as well, or?
We can certainly make that happen. Is there some time next week you'd want them to come on, or should we just let Linda help you find time and she can get a hold of me? I've got a pretty good crew of folks for the fairs that can come on and update you on what's going on.
Yeah, well, they're very important to all of us and to the people of the state. Yeah, definitely, we'd like to, hear from them and see what's in the plan for this coming year, and if there is anything and what they might, need for assistance if we get some money and
We
So
certainly
are-
appreciate that. Where's Joe?
Is Joe with us?
I don't see him there yet.
Not yet.
Well-
I just sent him an invite again.
I think, I hate to start without him, but with only 30 or, 35 minutes, we
Mhm.
want to certainly give you folks as much time as you need. So why don't we get started? We'll introduce ourselves quickly and move right to you, Jackie, and you're going to kind of control who talks and
Sure.
anyways, I'm Bobby Starr and I'm from Essex, Orleans.
Great. Good morning, Chris Pearson from the Chittenden District.
Good morning, Anthony Polina, Washington County.
Brian Collmore from Rutland County.
Corey Parent from Franklin County.
And so I'd like to welcome Farm Bureau members to our meeting this Tuesday morning and turn it over to Jackie Folsom and she can introduce their guest and we'll proceed.
Thank
So
you very
welcome.
much.
Welcome, Jackie.
Thank you, Senator and committee members. It's a pleasure to be here today. And we do appreciate the time that you've given us from Vermont Farm Bureau to speak. I think we'll hope that Joe gets on and maybe he'll back cleanup because he'll be the best one to do that, but we'll see when he pops in. So we have here today Steve Revitsky, who's the brand new executive director from Vermont Farm Bureau. We have Art Whitman, who's the president of Bennington County Farm Bureau. We have Mary White, who is the vice president of Vermont Farm Bureau and also the chair of the Dairy Committee. Oh, there's Joe. And we should be having Shane Keaty, who is the president of Orange County Farm Bureau, calling in. So Linda, I think I sent you his phone number in case he does pop up. He's out on the road between customers right now. So since Mr. Tisbert, President Tisbert is on, welcome, Joe. And why don't you kick us off with and I'd like to remind everybody that we have about 30 minutes. So we would like to leave time for questions at the end if there are any. So 5 or so minutes to everybody, and that would be great. Thanks. Joe, you're on.
What? Only 5 minutes, and I've spent like 3 days writing.
That was especially to you, Mr. President.
Well, first of all, Senator Starr, Chair Starr, and rest of the committee, I want to thank you for your passion and commitment to all of agriculture in our state. You've done a fantastic job over the years trying to help keep us in business and keep us floating and working with us to make sensible policies. And I can't wait to tell you how we could be in person and actually keep working with you as long as we can. Again, I want to thank you for what you guys have done. So there's a couple places that I think that we wanted to go. One of the things I wanted to talk about today was to highlight how Farm Bureau is about all agriculture. We're not in the middle of, we can't be in the middle of isolating ourselves. We need to make sure that not only do we have diversity in communities and diversity in other parts of society, but we also need to make sure that when our legislatures and our other farm groups and our farm groups and our farm group in particular, we look at the diversity of agriculture that it already is. Diversifying is not easy, so we want to make sure that our legislature understands that we need the diversity of all agriculture in Vermont. We need to have each person who farms and farms with a passion for their type of type of farming gets a chance to actually farm that passion. We can't all be one. We can't all be a clone. We'll never be successful being that way. A lot of things are going on in the national level that you probably know and some don't know, but making sure that our farmers have adequate labor and programs that are best suited for our farms. We need to keep them going and keep the labor working and keep the products coming off the farms. We're hearing a lot nationally about issues that are going to arise with H-2A workers coming into the state again. We also, President Trump had done executive order to change how H2A is paid, which has now been rescinded. So we're waiting to hear how much our H2A workers are going to get paid. And that's a real problem on some of our Vermont farms. We don't control pricing. And to have that price just keep going up, it went up 17% in 3 years. If it goes up that same motion again now, our farms are going to be at a great disadvantage. So if you're hearing anything, help us out. Some of the stuff I wanted to make sure that you guys understood is nationally, Farm Bureau is co-founded a couple of groups and is working hard on our climate. So we have 2 groups that are can be checked out. It's the really good stuff coming out of Washington, out of our Washington office. One is the Farmers for a Sustainable Future, and the other is Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance. We co-chair that with the Nature Conservancy, and what it's doing is it's trying to find ways for the climate and the food we need and the climate to act as one with agriculture. We all know that agriculture is the solution to climate and to water quality. We need to make sure that we have those focuses not only in our state but nationally. And we have a lot of information that we can share that will come forward out of these groups and meetings. Just the other day, I was on a call with the White House liaison, Kathy Ferguson, to the USDA, and she wants our input and our information from our farms and how can we most benefit from a climate solution that has to include agriculture. Our farms and forests, if you take the approximately 6 million acres in the state of Vermont, how much carbon are we sequestering for that? Nationally, only less than 10% of all the greenhouse gases comes from agriculture. So we need to make sure that when we pass policies, we're not only looking at how it helps agriculture, but to show the benefits of what agriculture can actually do. We have my particular farm is organic, and I love, and it's the right thing for us to be organic, but we need to make sure that we have a clear path to all farms, and all farms are equal, whether they're large or small or conventional or organic. There's no one farm better than the other. We all need to be in the party. We all need to be at the table. We all need to make sure that there's enough farmers on all these on committees that can help, when they help shape policy, have an input on how our state views agriculture. So again, we have lots of things that we need to discuss over the next year, but this is only a few of them. I've heard a lot about pricing and how we can give pricing of products from our state. How do we input that? And I think we've all found out how difficult that will be to change national systems of how we pay for things. How do we get ourselves the monies that we need for pricing of product? Well, that's going to be a difficult climb for all of us. And we at Farm Bureau are working hard. You can talk to Mary, I'm sure talks to you many times, but we're working hard to try to see how we can find a solution. We need solutions to this product. We need solutions to all products. I mean, we don't have control over any of our pricing. So one of the things that I think we can look at as a state is to make sure that the programs that we already have stay in existence. Act 250, we need to not take out any of the ag exemptions of Act 250. That's only going to cost farmers more money. Farmers are already paying a lot of money for these climate projects out of their own pocket. We need to make sure that we can help them. Current use needs to stay. I mean, unless we want to change it to use value, but current use needs to stay so farms can be viable. These are all things that are not in direct payment, but they're also things that will add the cost to farmers and make farmers less successful. So we need to keep them. The tax exemptions that we already have in place, they need to make sure that the tax department doesn't look for money and take things away. All these things, if we're going to do the right things, we need to make sure that we keep those programs in play. We find other programs that we can play and play, because we can't affect the price yet. Not saying we won't, but I'm saying yet, but we need to make sure if we can keep these programs that we already have in existence, that we're here to support agriculture and open lands, we need to work on that.
Yep.
So,
Thank-
go ahead. Sorry, Bob.
No, I thought you were finished, but no.
I could
you
talk for
still got
hours.
the-
No. Not today, sir.
Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, President Tisbert. If we could go to Mr. Ravitsky now for a quick couple statements.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, I think the last time or the first time we met in person was up in Orleans County at their County Farm Bureau breakfast, and that was probably one of the last public events that has taken place with COVID. Just more introductory who I am and how I got to the Vermont Farm Bureau. My wife and I own a farm up in Woodbury, Vermont. My family has owned that for over 30 years, and we lease it to a young couple who are farming organic vegetables there. In 2019, I retired, having served 8 years as the Commissioner of Agriculture in Connecticut. Prior to that, I was the Executive Director of the Farm Bureau, the Connecticut Farm Bureau, and I worked at the Connecticut Department of Agriculture in farmland protection for 8 years, and for our Department of Environmental Protection before that for a decade. During my time as commissioner, I was also very active in the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, worked very closely with Secretary Ross and Secretary Tebbets and the deputy secretaries, Diane Bothfeld, Abby Willard, Diane Zamos, the whole crew. So I'm very familiar with issues related to Food Safety Modernization Act and the challenges that those folks had in trying to advance agriculture in Vermont. So just, briefly, I think it bears repeating that the Farm Bureau is a not-for-profit membership organization. We are all about our members. We're led by members, and our goal is to advocate for the strength of family farms, to grow the agricultural economy, and to advocate for public policies that support family farms. And to all of you who serve on the Senate Ag Committee, I thank you for all the work you do and the dedication you have to grow Vermont farms. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, next we're going to go to Art Whitman down there in Bennington County. And I was going to try to email you, Art. Your cat's tail was so cute, flipping around on your shoulder there while we were listening to Steve and Joe. But Art, unmute yourself, and why don't you say hi to the members and talk to them a bit.
Oh, I don't see Art.
Yeah, he's there up in the corner, but I don't see him unmuting.
Oh,
There he
right
is.
up on.
How's that?
Yeah,
Sorry
there you
about that.
That's okay. Thanks.
Yes, I'm Art Whitman. I've president of Bennington County Farm Bureau. I've been in agriculture all my life, and I graduated from Vermont Tech, went home to the family business, which was a feed mill and a farmer retail store in Bennington, and retired from that 5 years ago, but I failed miserably at retirement. So I now have a company that spreads limestone and soil amendments, and we do trucking for other grain mills. So I wanted to talk briefly about forage supply in this area, which is like Bennington County and Washington, Rensselaer County in the state of New York, which is close by. There's a saying that in a dry year, a farmer worries to death, and in a wet year, he'll starve to death. But this saying has two implications. First of all, we're never happy. And secondly, weather is a huge factor in a farmer's life. in this area, most farmers are okay. The larger farmers have that have put on cows faster than they acquired land to support them. Part of their business plan is to buy forages. So that in my experience, most of them are okay for this until this spring. Another comment is that how mobile a large farmer has to be now. I was talking to a farmer that said he was a farmer until his son went away to college and then came back and they had to double the herd size. And now they're more of a trucking company than they are farmers. What is short down here is hay. The small conventional bales, it's hard to get people to handle them in the season. And in my opinion, there's two different kinds of hay dealers. There's the kind that is just a hobby farmer that will take what he can get off his land, maybe the neighbors and that sort of stuff. And then there's the people that actually will treat it as a business. They have a nutrient management plan. They make sure the soil pH is there. They apply nitrogen protected fertilizers at the right time and that sort of stuff. And that's called risk management. And that really paid off this year. I know two hay dealers in the same town. One of them had the best year he ever had. He's the one that applied fertilizers and had a nutrient management plan. The other one, just taking what he could get, does not have enough to satisfy his customers. So there is huge benefits in risk management planning. And for dairy farmers to become forage independent, they need to apply some of these risk managements, such as no-till planting, minimum tillage, cover crops, and not only just cover crops, but what's called double cropping, where your cover crop is something like triticale, which can come off in the early spring, and then doing a short season corn, which will give you more nutrients per acre than if you would just planted a long season corn. And then of course there's GMO seeds, which have huge things built into them. They're now drought tolerant, disease retollerant, and so on and so forth. So all of this requires thinking outside the box. And all of these new technologies aren't just in mechanical or machinery, but also in science-based programs. And so we need to have farmers have as many tools in their toolbox as necessary for them to do different applications on their farm. And if we start taking tools out of that toolbox, somebody gave the analogy of that, if we take too many tools out, we're just going to end up with a hammer in there. And that hammer is not very effective for all jobs. And in most cases, it does more damage than it does good. And what I'm referring to is the possible ban on atrazine and glyphosate. You cannot do no-till. You cannot do cover crops. You can't do double cropping if you take away these two very essential chemicals that have been around for a long time and been extremely effective. And I just want to finish up with climate change. Farming, as you know, is a highly mechanical industry that requires a lot of energy. But just think what the farmer is doing to the soils to improve it. And so does it make sense for us to tax the farmer and his suppliers that are improving these soils, which in turn enhances the soil water retention and carbon sequestration, that in turn mitigates soil or climate change? Are we not killing the goose that lays the golden egg? That's all I have. I'll be glad to answer any questions somebody has.
Yeah, thank you, Art.
Thank you, Art. And it is one of the issues that we were watching, and I think is sitting in your committee, the soil amendments, the registration piece that Carrie Giguere has been talking about from the agency. And I think you might be talking about that later this week. So we could, if you wanted Art to come in and speak to that, he would probably be a good witness because we've already had some discussions on that. So,
yeah.
and now
I think that might be up tomorrow. No, yeah, tomorrow at 10 o'clock, Art, if you want to join in on that, just send Linda an email, or Jackie, you can get with Linda and weigh in. We're going to hear from Carrie tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
10 o'clock.
Okay, Art and I will check back in. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Mary White to your committee. I think everybody knows her. She must be doing double duty for Jen Lambert because that's who I had listed today, but Jen's probably out doing some farming work, and Mary was kind enough to come in and say hi to you folks and let you know what's going on in her world.
Yeah. Hi, Mary.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. Just a quick introduction. My husband and I run a 220 head conventional dairy farm in Orange County. We're the 5th generation to farm here, and we ship all our milk wholesale to Cabot Agrimark. So just wanted to take the time to update you a little bit on what's been going on our end. Obviously, we all know that we're having some price and production struggles due to COVID and other factors. But another thing that's come up is labor issues. So we've had a very high turnover in labor, and the response I'm getting when we place a job ad now is less than half of what it was before COVID for local labor. So I'm not sure. I'm sure there's a lot of factors that go into that: unemployment, people just not wanting to work, maybe being fearful of an essential job, but we are not able to find the labor force that we had really tapped into pre-COVID. So that's been a huge struggle for us, and it's nothing due to wage. You know, we're willing to pay decent wages. It's just really getting people to apply and trying to get some people to even interview for these farming positions. So that's been a huge struggle that we've kind of swept under the rug and really focused on price and production. On the production piece, I just wanted to bring you a little bit up to date on what's going on within the supply management systems for the co-ops right now. So Agrimark right now is at a 3% deduct off our production from 2019. So we're a smaller farm, so we're looking at our monthly production, and we're going off those figures from 2019 minus 3%. The deduct for Agrimark pretty consistently throughout all of COVID has been the milk check price. So any milk that we ship over our allowed amount is a $0 figure for us. DFA was a little different. They had a 15% reduction off March 2020 milk, but their deduct has fluctuated anything from $3 to now closer to $15, reflecting the actual milk price. So these programs are still very different and are still in play for both of these co-ops, affecting most of Vermont producers. Another thing, I have been working with Vermont Technical College on the committee to re-envision the food and agriculture systems program over there. Not sure how updated you all are on the status of that program. It's been in works. There's over 40 volunteers within various industries of agriculture that have joined forces to really look at how do we keep the college open? How do we envision the dairy program and all sectors of agriculture to really make sure we're utilizing the campus and its resources to reflect what Vermont is looking at for a sustainable food system and where those careers are aligning. So that's been great to be a part of. We're hoping to have something soon and start advertising some of these new programs, and always look forward to any involvement with all of you on education. It's just so important, as I think all of you know, is trying to keep our farmers farming and doing practices that are good for the environment, management practice, whatever it may be. So that's an ongoing work in progress. Like I said, we're hoping to have something to launch soon and have a new update on that. The other thing I wanted to touch on was a program I'm sure you're all familiar with by now. It's the National Standard for Dairy Animal Welfare and Dairy Operations, the FARM program. We have just entered into a new revision of that program. It's called the FARM 4.0. So that program is looked at every 3 years by National Milk and other organizations in the industry standard nationally for dairy welfare, like I said. There's really been increased programs as far as more documentation, some increased training as well for all employees and farm owners, so farm labor, et cetera. So it's really good to see everyone coming together to try to work to one standard for our animal welfare nationally, and within the state, we always strive to do our best. So if there's any questions on any of those programs, I'd be happy to answer them, or any involvement with BTC at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Questions from the committee? Well, it sounds like Farm Bureau is very busy in this Zoom time. And, you know, we certainly appreciate the hard work that you guys are all doing. You know, we weigh in and try to help out here, there, wherever. And sometimes it's always great to hear from you guys that have boots on the ground and actually are doing the heavy lifting. So as far as helping all ag, I don't know if any of you were on the Zoom meeting yesterday, but they had a rollout of the new strategic plan for the Ellen Keeler and Abby Willard and their groups for the next 10 years. And there's a lot of good proposals in there to move forward with that should help all of agriculture. And so, you know, I know we try to keep everything on balance, and if, you know, like some of your group are dairy, some of them are veggies and apples and everything else. And we always try to weigh that out when we put our COVID bill together last year. I think, you know, Chris and Anthony, well, we all worked on it, making sure that the small farms and the non-dairy guys got treated fairly. Any comments on from other than how that worked with you guys, whether you're dairy or Joe, or your veggies? Did that make any difference for your farm?
So I think most of the guys that are my size and do the same similar to us as far as crops goes had pretty good years. Where we fell short was in agritourism, and the Working Lands grant actually helped out a little bit with that, which was good for us. But, you know, buying local and the more local, I think I've talked to many livestock producers, and a lot of them have said the same thing. They had great success selling if they could get processed. In Vermont, and as far as our local sales were as good as they've been in a probably, I think that in the last 6 or 7 years, the kind of local movement is there, but it went downhill a little bit. And with COVID, it made the local more important, and people were actually coming to the farm stand more, and people were like going out of their way to come, instead of where in the past they might say, well, it's on, I'm not going all the way to the farm, I'm just going to go to the store. So I think the COVID helped us. I think the programs that were put in place helped us some. And I believe anybody that needed the help in that program, as far as the specialty crops, got a little help. So I think the programs worked. I mean, I would love to see that, to make sure that it worked for all farms at an equal level, and dairy, and you know, we knew that dairy was the hardest hit for all of us, without any control. I wish that, you know, we proposed a lot more money than was given out, and we would like to have seen that happen. But as far as all the other farms go, the smaller farms, I mean, we actually paid, there's actually some state funds that help people redefine their business, either by doing online stores or having no touch stop up and drop your groceries off into a car, or, you know, I think a lot of us had to change directions on what we did. And I think that most of the smaller farms that I've talked to that have been that are in my position, similar to us, I think we had not as much effect from the COVID as we could have. And with the state help and the government and the federal government CARES Act funds and the CFAB money, everybody got a little piece of the action.
Yeah. Well, that sounds good, Joe, and I know we did spend quite a lot of time trying to figure that out last spring and in summer, making sure that everybody was treated pretty fairly. We've got another meeting in 15, 14, 13 minutes. And I hate to rush you, but this is a committee of the whole Senate that we've got to get on and got to get punched in, and hopefully everything will work. But don't forget about tomorrow's meeting at 10 in regards to Carrie's proposal to the committee. So if you want to listen in, you're more than welcome. Just get hold of Linda, and Jackie has all that information. So with that, anytime you want to come back, feel free to get hold of us, and we'll sit around Zoom and chat. Thanks a lot, everybody, and committee, we'll see you in a few minutes on our next meeting. So
Thank you for your
thank
time.
you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Bobby.